Hi, this lecture concludes our study of Descartes' meditations. What we'll focus on is Descartes' account of the external world and our place within it. To begin, recall that in the previous lecture, I explained Cartesian dualism, Descartes' view that mind and body are distinct substances. It's now important to add to that account, since Descartes says some things that might be a little bit unexpected. Descartes writes in the sixth meditation, "By means of these sensations of pain, hunger, thirst, and so on, nature also teaches that I am present in my body not merely in the way a sailor is present in a ship, but that I am most tightly joined and, so to speak, commingled with it, so much so that I and the body constitute one single thing." So what is Descartes saying here? Well, Descartes' question in these passages is, what's the relationship between my mind and my body? And in particular, what is the relationship between the two in having various sensations or feelings such as pain, hunger, and thirst? How is it that my mind has these various sensations? What's distinctive about these sensations is that they are sensations that give one information about one's body, and they do so directly. In other words, one learns about one's own body in these sensations in a first-personal sort of way, in a way that's different from how other people would learn about my body. Other people cannot experience my pain or my hunger. So what's Descartes saying in denying that the mind's relationship with the body is akin to a sailor's relationship with a ship? We'll consider the case of pain. Pain results from an injury to one's body. And when one is injured and feels pain, that's a direct awareness of the injury or damage to one's body. But the sailor's awareness of an injury or damage to the ship is a different kind of awareness. The sailor has to observe what happens on the ship. The sailor doesn't directly feel the damage, but rather feels the consequences of it and observes the consequences of that damage. But in pain, hunger, and thirst, the mind directly feels what's going on in the body. And this is why Descartes says that one's body and mind are commingled in these sorts of sensations, and that the mind and body, in a way, constitute one single thing. And this contrasts with the sailor and the ship. The sailor and the ship could be separated and nothing would change between the two of them. But the body and the mind being separated would result in a significant change, because one could no longer feel pain, hunger, thirst, and so on. Descartes makes exactly this point when he writes, quote, "For if this were not the case, then I, who am only a thinking thing, would not sense pain when the body is injured. Rather, I would perceive the wound by means of the pure intellect, just as a sailor perceives by sight whether anything in his ship is broken." So what Descartes has done here is examine or analyze our experience in having feelings such as pain or hunger. And those experiences reveal that there is a distinctive relationship between mind and body. I've been talking as if we know that there is a body, that there's any body's external objects at all. Recall that the very beginning of the meditations cast into doubt our ability to know that an external world exists, an external world that includes one's body. Descartes returns to this question in the sixth meditation, and he presents the following argument in support of the thought that we can know that the external world exists. The argument runs as follows. First, Descartes makes the point that we cannot help but believe that the various sensible ideas that we have, visual sensations, tactile sensations, and so on, we cannot help but believe that those sorts of things come from corporeal things outside of oneself. Corporeal things meaning bodily things, things made up of matter. The idea here is that these sorts of sensations, sight, touch, smell, and so on, are something that we have only because we are affected by external objects. They don't come from us. We're not creating these sensations. Rather, they're created by other things and how those other things affect us. So the thought here is that we need to find a cause for the effect that we have. The effect is that we have sensations, and we're not the cause because we're passive in having those sensations. So what is the cause of those sensations? Well, it seems like we cannot help but believe it's some external object. But how can we be sure that it's an external object that creates these sensations, that is in fact the cause? Well, this is where Descartes' proof of God's existence, of course, comes in. Since God is not a deceiver, he wouldn't allow us to be mistaken about something that we cannot help but believe. So we can be sure that corporeal things, external objects exist. And of course, if external objects exist, then we can do the sciences. Then we can do things like physics, chemistry, astronomy, and so on. And so this shows that Descartes' proof of God's existence is crucial for establishing a certain foundation for the sciences. And that's Descartes' main motivation for proving that God exists. And let us conclude this look at the Meditations by seeing how Descartes addresses the other form of skeptical doubt, the worry that we might just be dreaming and that we cannot distinguish waking life from dreaming. Descartes says that we can distinguish dreams from waking life by noticing, quote, dreams are never joined by the memory with all the other actions of life, as is the case with those actions that occur when one is awake, end quote. So the difference between waking life and dreaming is the way in which one's memories relate to one's dreams or one's waking life. Of course, the stuff that dreams are made of, so to speak, are memories. Memories of images, sounds, taste, and so on. But memories relate differently to one's dreams than to one's waking life. Descartes says elsewhere that basically the idea here is that one's memories relate to one's waking life as a coherent story or narrative. In one's waking life, you can relate what you're currently experiencing with the past. You can explain how what's presently happening arises from the past, how it is that the current sensations that you have are connected with things that have happened in the past, things that you've perceived in the past. In contrast, when you dream, that's an interruption of the narrative. And that's how Descartes concludes the Meditations. I suggest using your memory to think about how Descartes argued that we cannot distinguish between waking life and dreaming, because it's not so clear that this present account is exempt from the worries that he raised in the first meditation.